A student once asked the Buddha, "Master, I am afraid every waking hour. How do I make it stop?" The Buddha smiled and said, "Don't." Why would he say that? Why not simply teach a way to end the fear? Because the Buddha noticed something the student had missed entirely. Fear was not the enemy standing in his way. It was a messenger, knocking quietly at the door. Today I'll tell you what it was trying to say. Imagine a river at night. Moonlight ripples across the surface of the water. Somewhere in the distance, insects are singing. A gentle wind moves through the grass. It is a quiet, unhurried night. A young monk sits alone at the river's edge. His eyes are closed. He is breathing slowly, but there is something tight in his face. A tension that won't quite release. Where am I going? Is this really the path I should be walking? Those thoughts rose and dissolved like mist above the dark water, one after another. There are nights like this for everyone. Nights when you can't see what's ahead. When something in your life is shifting, or when something deep inside you has quietly started to move. That feeling is a little like a river. You can't stop it, and you can't quite chase it either. Years later, this monk would tell others about that night, and what he said surprised them. "I wasn't afraid," he said. "I just desperately wanted to know." That wanting, so honest, so open, was itself a kind of prayer. Not a prayer asking for an answer, but one that simply said, "I am here, and I do not know." And perhaps that is the truest thing any of us can offer. Several hundred years after the Buddha walked this earth, a quiet collection of teachings began to spread across the Indian subcontinent. It traveled not with fanfare, but the way a candle passes its flame to another, gently, steadily, from person to person. This collection was called the Dhammapada. The name means path of the Dharma, or simply words of the truth. It gathered the Buddha's teachings into short verses, 423 of them, arranged across 26 chapters. It was not a book of philosophy. It was something more like a collection of living words, the kind you reach for when your heart is unsteady, and read again and again. One evening, a young monk came to his teacher holding a handwritten copy of the text. The teacher was an elderly monk, a man who had walked a long road and arrived somewhere very still. "Teacher," the young monk said, "there is something in these opening lines I cannot understand." The teacher looked at him calmly. "Tell me what you can't understand." The young monk pointed to the page. "Here, it says, mind is the forerunner of all actions. Mind is the master. Mind makes all things. That part I understand. But then it says, if one speaks or acts with a troubled mind, suffering follows, as the wheel follows the hoof of an ox. And I am frightened, teacher. I don't know whether my own mind is troubled or clear. I can't tell. And because I can't tell, I'm afraid. What does this mean?" The teacher was quiet for a moment, watching the young monk's face. Then gently he asked, "Where does that fear come from?" The young monk tilted his head. "I don't know. I'm just afraid." "Look a little longer," the teacher said. "What is underneath the fear?" The young monk closed his eyes. The teacher did not hurry him. The moon crossed the center of the sky. At last the young monk opened his mouth. "I want to know." The teacher gave a small nod. "Yes, you feel afraid because you've noticed your own mind moving. If you hadn't noticed, there would be nothing to fear. That fear is born in the moment when something sleeping wakes up. And so hidden inside every fear, there is always curiosity." The young monk's eyes went wide. "You mean fear and curiosity are the same thing?" "Not the same," the teacher said, "but they grow from the same root. The Dhammapada says mind comes first. Fear and curiosity are both shapes the mind creates. So ask yourself, where does the mind come from?" The one who can hold that question has already begun to walk. The young monk sat in silence for a while. Outside, the insects kept singing. Then slowly, he lowered his eyes to the page. This time, there was no tightness in his chest. Something else had taken its place, a quiet aliveness. What lies beneath these words? I want to read deeper. I want to understand. That feeling rose through him like warmth, gently replacing the fear that had been there before. The teacher watched and said nothing. There was nothing left to say. The Dhammapada begins with the mind. That is not an accident. Every suffering, every liberation, All of it moves within the mind. That is what this ancient text tells us from its very first line. And so the text does not begin with rules or rituals or a distant heaven to reach for. It begins exactly where you are, sitting in this body, in this moment, with whatever is moving through you right now. A farmer plants a seed in dark soil and cannot see what is happening beneath the surface, but something is happening. The Dhammapada trusts that you will tend what you cannot yet see. That is the invitation of these 423 verses, not to arrive somewhere new, but to look more carefully at the ground you are already standing on. The Dhammapada opens with these words: mind is the forerunner of all actions. When most people read this, they think, right, what's inside matters, and then they move on. But before you do, I'd like you to pause here for just a moment. If mind comes first, then fear and curiosity are both things the mind creates. The fear is not out there in the world. The mind is making the shape called fear. And that means something important. When we feel afraid, we usually assume the frightening thing is outside us. A dark hallway, an uncertain future, a life that's starting to change. That's what's scary, we think. But the Dhammapada points somewhere else. Fear doesn't arise because a situation is dangerous. It arises because the situation collides with a fixed idea in our minds, a belief that this is not how things should be, or this is not what I know. The suffering comes not from the event itself, but from the gap between reality and the rigid shape we've built inside ourselves. I must always know what's coming. If things change, I can't go back. This is who I am. When reality no longer fits those shapes, something breaks. That is what Buddhism means by suffering. So why do two people face the same situation, and one feels fear, while the other feels curiosity? The answer is simpler than you might expect. It's not about whether you have fixed ideas or not. It's whether you've noticed them. Fear is what happens when you stop just before awareness. Curiosity is what happens when you take one more step and begin to look beyond the edges of those fixed shapes. Both are facing the same unknown. The mind is just tilted in a slightly different direction. Now let me ask you something. If you believe you are someone who's always afraid, or someone without much curiosity, what exactly is that someone? Is there really a fixed, solid self that exists as a fearful person? Buddhism says no. There is no fixed, permanent self. What we call I is a shifting arrangement, shaped by our experiences, our relationships, the condition of our bodies, the mood of the day. Yesterday's self and today's self are like river water, similar on the surface, but never quite the same. A fearful self is a pattern built from the past. It is not your essence. It is not your nature, and it is not unchangeable. Given different conditions, it begins to show a different face. The Dhammapada continues, if one speaks or acts with a clear mind, joy follows like a shadow that never departs. A clear mind doesn't mean the mind of a saint. It means a mind that gently loosens its fixed shapes and tries to see what's actually here, as it is, not something you force or manufacture, something that appears naturally once you notice. Fear holds curiosity inside it. The moment you see that structure, the world shifts, just slightly. A monk I once heard of kept a small stone in his pocket for 30 years, not as a symbol, but simply to remember the weight of something real. Each time his mind began spinning stories about the future, he would close his hand around it and ask, what is actually here, right now? Not the story, not the shape he had built, just the stone and the hand and this breath. That is all a clear mind requires. Not a monastery, not decades of practice, but one moment of returning to what is actually present. Let's bring this into everyday life and walk through it together. First, think about work. You've been handed a new project, a role you've never held before. You feel a low hum of unease in your stomach. Can I actually do this? What if I fail? The thoughts loop. The fear is real. But if you look at it a little more closely, something starts to emerge. There's a picture you carry of who you're supposed to be. I must not fail. I must always be capable. And that picture is grinding against the new, uncharted situation. The fear is the sound of that friction. Now look just underneath it. Is there even a small sense of, I wonder what this will be like? Could I actually do this? I'd like to find out. That flicker, however faint, is the seed of curiosity. Fear and curiosity don't live in separate rooms. They share the same space, layered on top of each other. Now think about someone close to you, a friend you've known for years, or a family member who suddenly seems different. Something has shifted between you, and the shift frightens you. The person you thought you knew no longer quite matches the person in front of you. But pause here. When something feels like it has changed, has only the other person changed? Haven't you quietly changed too, without realizing it? And was the person you knew ever really a fixed, solid thing? Or was it a picture your mind painted? People are constantly in motion, shaped by the forces around them. The image of who they are is something our minds construct. When reality stops matching the picture, fear arrives. But that same fear can also become a doorway, an invitation to ask, who is this person really? I want to understand them more deeply. And then there is the fear that runs even deeper, the fear of aging, of loss, of death. As years pass, the body no longer moves the way it used to. Memory softens at the edges. People we love leave before us. These changes bring a profound fear. That is only natural, but at the bottom of that fear, if you look carefully, you will usually find something like a stone, a deep wish that things would stay as they are. Please don't let this change. As the Dhammapada teaches, mind comes first. It is not change itself that causes suffering. It is the mind that demands permanence, that makes change feel this heavy. To be afraid of aging is, in its own way, to be deeply engaged with being alive. And when that orientation tilts even slightly, when aging frightens me, becomes what does it mean to age, the same fear begins to carry a different color. None of this is easy or quick, but somewhere, knowing that fear and curiosity share the same root, when fear arrives, you may find yourself able to look at it from a slightly different angle. A monk once said that the most honest prayer he ever heard was from an elderly woman in his community, who on her deathbed whispered, "I don't want to go, but I am so curious about what going means." She was not at peace despite her fear. She was at peace inside it. That small turning, that almost imperceptible shift in how she held the same feeling was enough. Here is one small thing to try, starting today. When you feel afraid, write it down. It doesn't need to be a journal, a note on your phone, a line in a pocket notebook, a corner of an old envelope. Just this: I felt afraid. When and of what? A few words, that's enough. Why write it? The Dhammapada speaks of a clear mind, and that clarity begins with awareness. Fear feels largest when it moves through us unseen, but the moment you write the words, "I am afraid right now," something shifts. The fear steps slightly outside of you, and once it's outside, you can begin to see it. In the Buddhist time, monks were taught to observe their inner lives as a foundation of practice. But this wasn't only about sitting in formal meditation for hours. It meant staying quietly attentive, while walking, while eating, while in conversation, watching the movements of the mind without turning away. That attentiveness was woven into ordinary life. After you write down the fear, add one more line. What might be underneath this? You don't need an answer today. Nothing needs to change immediately, but holding the question, that alone is a way of turning the mind towards something new. You don't have to make the fear disappear. You don't have to run from it. Just give it a name and look at it quietly for a moment. That small act can change your relationship with it. Tonight, before you sleep, try to recall one moment when fear visited you today. Write it down briefly, then ask just once, what might be underneath this? Don't search for the answer. Just place the question there and close your eyes. In the morning, you may find the question is still with you, and that is not a problem. That is the practice beginning to work. A farmer does not plant a seed and stand waiting through the night, expecting to find a tree by morning. He returns the next day and the day after that, and eventually notices something small and green that was not there before. So it is with this kind of looking. Not dramatic, not sudden, but quiet and cumulative and real. When was the last time you were afraid and stepped forward anyway? Looking back now, if something else was quietly hidden inside that fear, what do you think it might have been? Take your time. There's no rush. Just let yourself sit with it, gently, for a little while. A monk once told me that whenever he felt most afraid, he would place one hand over his heart, not to calm it, but simply to feel that it was still beating, still here, still faithful to him, even when he had forgotten himself. That small gesture, he said, taught him more about courage than any sutra he had ever read. And perhaps that is what courage has always been, not the absence of trembling, but the willingness to remain present while you tremble. There is an old story of a student who came to her teacher weeping, ashamed that her hands had shaken as she rang the temple bell. The teacher listened, then smiled and said, "The bell still rang, didn't it?" We explored the other side of this coin, what it means to keep curiosity alive, even when life feels uncertain, in a previous teaching. You'll find the link in the description below. The Dhammapada begins with the mind. Every suffering, every joy, mind comes first. Those words have traveled across 2,500 years and arrived here, unchanged, in front of us. Fear is not weakness. It may be a signal that your mind has begun to notice something. When you meet something you don't know, the mind trembles, and inside that trembling, the seed of curiosity is already waiting. I can't promise that fear will disappear if you keep going. It will come back, in different shapes, at different times. That is simply part of being alive. But when you've caught even a glimpse of what fear really is, it shows you a slightly different face than it did before. That quiet shift is what Buddhism calls a humble transformation. Thank you for being here today, and for listening. I hope you'll keep watching your own mind, gently and with kindness. Like that young monk sitting by the river in the dark, the one who could hold a question inside their fear has already begun to walk. That walk may be slow, and the path may disappear in the tall grass, but the walking itself is the answer. Even a single step taken with an open mind leaves a mark, not on the ground, but somewhere inside you. And without realizing it, that mark becomes the road. Pause. Whose face came to mind while you were listening today? One story a day. In a week, your words will change. In a month, your eyes will change. In a year, the same world will look completely different.